It's far better to prevent the overpayment from happening because recovery is difficult, it is time-consuming, and it isn't very successful.
Hi, and welcome to GAO's Watchdog Report, your source for fact-based, nonpartisan news and information from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I'm your host, Holly Hobbs. Early in the pandemic, the federal government prioritized swiftly distributing checks to businesses and workers to help meet the urgent needs they faced because of economic disruptions. But this quick action put billions of dollars at increased risk of fraud and overpayment. Now that the pandemic is over, how is the federal government working to recover overpayments, and how much has been recovered? We'll find out more from GAO's Hannah Padilla, an expert on federal payment integrity, who has a new report out today on this issue. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Holly.
So, Hannah, our work looked at kind of the three big programs under COVID-19. These were programs that helped workers, that helped small businesses. It's the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury and Disaster Loan Program, and unemployment insurance, right? How big of a problem were overpayments under these programs? How big of an issue was this?
Overpayments at the federal government has historically been a big issue, and it only became more pronounced during the pandemic. Actual improper payments identified for recovery by the federal government as a whole is about $142 billion. And it's important to note that these identified numbers for recovery are not specific just to these programs, but they are for those agencies as a whole. The Department of Labor expended approximately $900 billion in unemployment insurance, and that includes some of the newer pandemic-related programs. And they estimate that about 35% of those payments were improper. They also reported about $23 billion that they've identified to recover. SBA expended $1 trillion during the pandemic, mostly through the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. They have only identified approximately $1 billion in overpayments to recover.
Can you help us understand how an overpayment or an improper payment would happen?
Well, there were several reasons that they occurred, especially during the pandemic. This was a very unprecedented time for the agencies, and agencies were given large amounts of money to quickly distribute to individuals and businesses that were in need. And in doing so, they relied heavily on the states to administer the programs because the states administer unemployment insurance programs on behalf of the Department of Labor. The systems at the states are sometimes very antiquated. The processes and procedures did not consider the amount of claims that came through during the pandemic and the fact that they had to hit the ground running and get those payments out to the people in need. SBA, in order to process loans quickly, used new lenders that weren't familiar with the processes at SBA, the review and approval processes, and these things contributed to the risk of overpayments occurring. In addition, there was this new concept of self-certification where the applicants went in and simply said, yes, I meet the eligibility criteria for these programs. And those certifications were not subject to any type of proof or verification by the agencies.
So now that the pandemic is over, what is SBA and the Department of Labor doing to identify and recover these overpayments?
Yes, well, one thing we noted was both SBA and the Department of Labor lack sufficient processes, and they lack the appropriate systems to ensure that they are properly identifying and tracking recoveries. One thing SBA is doing, they're simply relying on people to start paying their loans back. They're also engaging debt collection agencies and using certain Treasury offset programs in an effort to get some of their loans that are in default repaid. Unemployment insurance is a state-administered program, so the Department of Labor needs to rely on the processes and the systems at the state level to collect their overpayments. And some of the systems at the state level weren't designed or set up to deal with such a large influx of claims as they had to during the pandemic. So they've recovered very little.
How much has been recovered so far?
Well, considering how much was expended, not much. For the 3-year period from fiscal year 2020 to 2023, SBA only recovered about $20 million of the over $1 billion that they've identified for recovery. DOL, again, relies on the states to recover the money. States have identified about $55 billion in overpayments for recovery, and they've only recovered about $3.7 billion of that. And it is important to note that the states have the ability to waive collection of overpayments if it was an error made by the agency or the employer. And they have waived about $11 billion so far. And we expect that number could grow because they're continuously identifying overpayments.
Hannah just told us that while the Department of Labor and the Small Business Administration are working to recover overpayments of COVID-related emergency funds, so far, very little of the identified improper payments have actually been returned. So Hannah, what more do we think the Small Business Administration and the Department of Labor should be doing to recover payments?
Well, to take a step back, we believe the real focus should be on preventing the overpayment or the improper payment from occurring to begin with. Because once the payment is made, it is very difficult to get it back, and only a very small amount is actually recovered. We also found that both the Department of Labor and SBA could do a better job in developing processes for tracking overpayments and for tracking recoveries in order to maximize the potential to actually recover these funds. SBA has recently made a change to an existing decision, which was not to collect loans with balances under $100,000. And they've since rescinded that decision. We think that's a very positive course of action for SBA. For the Department of Labor, the states continue to struggle with recovery of pandemic-related unemployment overpayments. And one thing we believe would help them is to establish some baseline measures for the states to follow. So the states would have a goal to reach, and we believe that would help incentivize the states to actually recover more of these funds.
Has Labor changed their approach at all?
The Department of Labor is in process of implementing an unemployment modernization plan. And we think as they continue that effort, they'll be better prepared to react to future economic shifts like what happened during the pandemic.
You said that not making a payment in the first place is far easier than having to go get the payment back afterward. Is there something that SBA or Labor could do next time to prevent these overpayments or improper payments?
Yes, we think there is. GAO released a report in July of 2023, and that report really focuses on managing improper payments in emergency assistance programs, such as those that occurred during the pandemic. And the report really lays out an overall approach to manage improper payments and overpayments specifically. One of the things the report highlights is the importance of applying lessons learned and really taking a step back and thinking about the vulnerabilities that were exploited during the pandemic and then building controls into their programs that would mitigate those vulnerabilities. Also, prioritizing prepayment controls, not relying on self-certifications. Again, it's so much easier to keep the money from going out than to try to claw the money back at the end.
And last question, what's the bottom line of this report?
The bottom line of this report is there's upfront steps that the agencies can take to prevent these overpayments from occurring in the first place. It's far better to prevent the overpayment from happening because recovery is difficult, it is time-consuming, and it isn't very successful.
That was Hannah Padilla talking about our new report on COVID-related overpayments. Thanks for your time, Hannah.
Thank you, Holly.
And thank you for listening to the Watchdog Report. To hear more podcasts, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And make sure to leave a rating and review to let others know about the work we're doing. For more from the Congressional Watchdog, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, visit us at gao.gov.